Looks like folks are rolling in. We'll wait just a moment longer and then we'll kick things off. Excited to have all of you joining us today. Thanks for carving out the time and excited to dive into this topic. Well, with that said, we're at the top of the hour, so we've got folks joining continuously, but let's dive in right away. So excited to have you all with us this morning. I really appreciate it. My name is Luke Steckler. I lead partnerships here at MHC, and really excited to have two awesome gentlemen sharing their knowledge with you all today. We've got Stephen Kwiatkowski from Elire and Nick Fritz from MHC, and we're gonna just to tell you all a little bit about them as we get going. So Nick has, been with MHC for over a decade, over a decade of that within accounts payable automation, from a lot of different aspects from, again, solution presentations to implementations and change management, been involved across lots of different verticals, a lot of expertise within that. So can really speak to this many times from a couple different sides of the coin, from the customer perspective, from maybe a third party, a consultant view, looking at it from the outside in. So really excited to have him with us today. And, MHC is, again, kind of many customers, many happy customers is what we like to say MHC stands for within this entire ecosystem. So excited to have Nick with us today. And then he's joined by Stephen Kwiatkowski from Elire. Stephen's been at Elire for over 8 years, again, over a decade of true consulting experience and expertise, whether that's strategic initiatives, whether that's process-based change management, can really aid on, virtually everything from strategy to optimization to transformation. And Elire is super knowledgeable, very well respected and well regarded, especially in the treasury space. They're certainly experts there, have done many hundreds of projects, whether it's liquidity, planning, analysis, lots of ways, and again, even things beyond treasury within ERP that Elire is really a go-to partner for. So excited to have these two talking with us today, and excited to have you all for joining us. So, no rest for the weary. We're going to dive right in and kind of really kick this off with our first poll question. We want to learn from some of you all. So you should see this, popping up on your screen now, but curious to hear from your perspective, challenges, things that are going on within your organizations today. What do we have coming up? Really feel free to choose all that apply, whether it's, again, things on the AP side, things on the treasury side. These are something that Stephen and Nick are really going to unpack as a part of our conversation today, but we're curious to set a baseline, really, to set a foundation from you all on, hey, what does the current state look like? And then we can maybe even tailor some of our responses and answers to that as we go. We've got some good answers coming in. Appreciate that, everyone. We'll maybe keep it up for another 10 seconds or so. All right. Got some good answers there. So we're going to go ahead and shut that down. We'll share the results. So you should see those now. And again, interesting, really, I would say that, the vast majority of you highlighted, hey, between AP and Treasury, we have a high amount of manual processes. Again, not a lot on the system limitation side, but certainly, again, a number of you also saying, hey, gaps in collaboration, lack of visibility. So helpful for our team today to maybe, again, kind of tailor some components based on the manual nature and some of the gaps and lack of visibility that you all have. Thank you all for the interaction. There'll be more of those to come. So, again, keep your popcorn ready and we'll dive through. So setting the stage for the rest of our time together today. We're going to unpack really the why between AP and Treasury. We're going to start to lay out a roadmap for success overall on, ways to, again, cover a bit of what we just mentioned there: collaboration, optimization, processes, data, and then really try to connect that all together. How do you take some of this action, or how do you take some of this information, I should say, and drive that into action, drive that into, results and an impact within your organization. So we'll dive into the why right away and get started.
Thank you, Luke. I'll take it from here. So I did want to spend just a few minutes talking about the big picture. And a lot of this information is not new to any of you folks on the call, I'm very sure. In terms of things like economic uncertainty, this is always the case when you're in the field that we're in, right? But I did want to call out a few key items that have happened within the last couple of years that are really driving us to talk more openly about the value that can be gained by seeing AP and Treasury kind of in the same light. So number one, really the end of zero interest rate policies. So if anybody's been paying attention, the cost of borrowing has kind of gone up and up and up and up and up. The Fed interest rate hikes have been the steepest in 40 years. And really that's trickling down into the corporate sector as well. Other causes of market uncertainty, you've got things like the debt ceiling crisis last month. It all got sorted out, no defaults, everybody's happy, but it's just one thing in a long string of, earlier in the year, there were bank collapses. There's always something going on that's going to cause market uncertainty and really drive the need for careful cash management. If you look at the labor sector, unemployment has stayed relatively low over the last couple of years. Basically since the bounce back post-COVID, unemployment rates have stayed really, really low, and the cost of labor has stayed high, hence driving the Fed to do what they're doing. And that really means for organizations that you want to get the most value possible out of your headcount, because it's a competitive market out there, and you're going to have to pay to keep that headcount around. Finally, and this is lessened in the last couple of months a little bit, but really over the last couple of years, the inflation pressure has been through the roof. And again, from the Treasury perspective, it means that you really want to be careful about your cash management. Because if you're sitting on piles of cash and you're not investing, day after day, that's losing value. So our perspective is it makes sense now to be strategic about how you're managing those cash reserves. And one of the key ways to do that is working very, very closely in collaboration with your AP department. From the organizational side, again, in the last couple of years, a few key items that have kind of come up more recently. You've got automation pressures in terms of new tools, things like robotic process automation, machine learning being built into all kinds of different ERP tools, AI. AI is not quite there yet, but it's kind of been in vogue. It's been in the news, and it is kind of the next horizon, right? So even if there aren't fully baked out AI tools that are going to do your cash management for you, or process all of your invoices for you, it is a transformative tool that's on the horizon. And so the pressures are out there. Organizations are adopting them. They're thinking of creative ways to use these tools. Even within the more traditional tools that are out there for digital transformation, they've gotten quite a bit better in the last couple of years. Many of you are sure familiar with OCR, or optical character recognition, on the AP side, but really that's been enhanced in the last couple of years, moving from template-based, really strict, high exception rates, to moving from OCR to what we're calling whole document recognition. So, or intelligent capture. So basically moving from telling your application, okay, look here for the date, look here for the PO number, look here for the amount, and still getting a bunch of exceptions, having the tool itself look at the full document, interpret what an appropriate date is, what a PO string looks like, and being able to pull that out of anywhere on a document. So it really is elevating even more traditional tools for digital transformation to that next level. Similarly, in the Treasury side, everybody's been doing Treasury on Excel forever, but a lot of the TMS platforms that are out there, so cloud-based subscription Treasury platforms, have really, really robust tool sets, and they're becoming more and more accessible, even if not more and more affordable. The functionality is there to really drive that conversion from like a manual offline Excel-based process to an online cloud-based type process. So the demands are there, the pressures are there, the tools are there. And really from an organizational perspective, that request to optimize your cash flow management, we know that's what treasurers are focused on day in and day out. But more than ever, there's this opportunity to reduce the costs of what have traditionally been cost centers. And that's looking at your bank fees and reducing those. That's looking at your discounts on the AP side and capturing those, and really starting to make strategic decisions about how to pay these bills with the implementation of some of these new tools. So on the next slide, we'll get into it a little bit more about how we see AP and Treasury kind of interacting. From our perspective, it's really, it's all part of procure to pay, right? But in my experience, at least, the pay side usually stops at AP, and you don't usually think as much about the Treasury side. You throw that work over the wall and you tell the Treasury team to just pay whatever comes. But if you break that mindset and you start to think of AP and Treasury working hand in hand as just two parts of the payment process, you'll start to notice things like AP automation is really a prerequisite for some of your Treasury processing. Getting that real-time invoice and liability and supplier data in your Treasury application is going to pay dividends down the line with your Treasury team. If you don't have that connectivity, if you're disconnected, I'm sure you're all familiar with these disconnects, but you're going to get that lack of visibility until your liabilities, right? And that's going to trickle into your cash position. You won't be able to do a forecast if you don't know what your incoming liabilities are for the next 30 or 45 or 90 days. Of course, there's the risk of late payments if you're still processing everything manually. There's missed discount opportunities. If you're processing everything manually, if you're not taking advantage of opportunities, you're not saving that money. And then, of course, on the Treasury side, you're losing some of that payment optimization or investment ability because you need to keep enough cash on hand to pay these inbound bills that just show up at your doorstep. So our goal is to kind of take a half a step back, look at AP and Treasury as one part of an interdependent process, and really talk about it as a cash flow management process. Because that's really when you look at it that way, that's when you're going to start to alleviate some of these pain points. So our roadmap to building this collaboration focuses on these 4 areas. One is really just collaboration. It's very organizational focused, and we'll talk a little bit about how you can build that collaboration into some of your work. Number 2 is optimizing your application. So the applications itself, like we saw in the poll, that wasn't as big of a concern for a lot of you. Your applications are fine, they work. We'll still talk about some optimization opportunities there that we see. Automating processes. Obviously, this was the big one that everybody was excited about. We'll talk about not just how to automate processes, but how it affects both upstream and downstream, right? How does AP automation affect your Treasury team? How does Treasury automation affect your AP team? And then the final thing we'll talk about is data. So we want to talk just a little bit about the value of having a shared master set of data. And Nick will talk about that in some length. So that leads us into our second poll question. Luke, I think you're going to take it from here, right?
Thank you. So yeah, we're curious again to get the audience's perspective. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this. You all mentioned again a good amount of manual processes the first time around. We heard a lack of visibility for some, and then maybe some gaps in collaboration. So curious, hey, kind of a state of the state, if you will. How effective would you all rate the current collaboration between your teams? Is it outstanding? Is it again, what collaboration? Is it somewhere in between? So I see some good responses flowing in. Please keep those coming. This certainly helps us again kind of tailor the conversation to what you all are thinking about. We'll leave that open for another 10 seconds or so. All right, I'm gonna end the poll here in just a minute. We'll close it down now. Share those results. And again, insightful. So kind of looking out, across the board, there's, nearly half of you that would say, hey, we have a lot of room for improvements. We have, again, a little bit of an uptick saying, hey, we are a well-oiled machine. And then some folks say, hey, it works. What collaboration? So really a smattering over the board, but nearly half of the audience saying, hey, we certainly recognize the need to improve in these areas. So thank you. Thank you to everybody for participating. We'll shut that down. There'll be a couple more polls to come. So get ready. And then we'll dive into improving collaboration.
Thank you, Luke. So we did want to talk about a couple of opportunities or a couple of specific strategies to improve this collaboration. And number one is got nothing to do with systems. It's really about building that culture, breaking down internal silos. And one of the ways that we see that you can do that is to set connected goals. So instead of dividing up your KPIs and your metrics department by department or group by group, starting to think about it at that higher level of, we're really one, payment processing team across AP and Treasury. So we should have team goals. Setting those goals and establishing a joint responsibility and accountability for them is really a kind of a unique way to start to bridge some of those gaps. If you're both accountable for like the time to pay, or if you're both accountable for the percentage of payments released on time, and you both need to hit that metric, you're necessarily going to be communicating better. You're going to be pushing the automation. You're going to be making sure that you smooth over any of those handoffs. Any of the other type of KPIs that we see here, those are just examples. But really starting to view your team as not two separate departments, but two parts of a greater whole is one of the first steps towards building that culture. Hand in hand with, very explicitly setting goals, building that into your tasks for the year, doing things like financial planning, decision making. So that could include jointly working on your budgets. That could include, strategic decision making. If Treasury is making different strategic plans, if they're trying to do a TMS platform implementation, make sure you bring AP into the fold before you just buy a platform and go with it. Same thing with the AP team. That all of your work is going to downstream be affecting Treasury. Bring them into those strategic meetings. One of the other ways that you can really drive collaboration is by focusing on payments. And that's going to be a big theme for us today, is that AP and Treasury together can really focus on the payment side of the house. So instead of just paying your suppliers, first come, first serve, who's ever in the door first, excuse me, you can really start to drive your supplier payments based on your cash position. So if you have that collaboration between Treasury and AP, you'll get better management of your working capital. Similarly, starting to develop forecasting. So a very simple forecast. So a very simple forecast can start to come into play if you have visibility into your liabilities and your bank account balances. Obviously, you can expand that forecast if you get better visibility into your investments, debt, receivables, etc. But simple forecasting, just pulling in your bank statements and your current liabilities, is very, very possible and pretty powerful as well. So if this isn't something that you have in place, it should definitely be the first start. Integrating that data together, building that forecast, and then making that available to both teams is definitely kind of the first step to building broader collaboration across different processes. And then finally, this kind of goes with what we were talking about strategic planning above, but focus on being united in your technology investments. So in some cases, that's security or access to your data. So you're making sure your Treasury team knows what's coming down the pipeline from AP. right? That could be just access to an invoices dashboard. That could be access to reports. That visibility depends on your organization. But similarly, making sure that your AP management has access to view some of the treasury data. Make sure that both teams are thinking about both sides of that coin. Finally, prioritizing any investments that'll really empower both departments. So both tools that we're going to talk about today, both AP automation platforms and TMS platforms, are really going to pay dividends for both departments. So, work together on finding the budget and building the business case and the implementation project. Your treasury implementation should include your AP team. Your AP automation implementation should include feedback from your treasury team. And you can use those budgets, you can use those investments to see dividends for both groups. On the next slide, these are kind of the outcomes that you'll see when you reach that well-oiled machine that a couple of the attendees have already reached. You're going to see more enhanced financial controls. If you're working closely, it's that much easier to identify whether it's fraud or just an error, duplicates, right? You'll know that there are duplicate payments being created. You'll know that there are duplicate invoices being submitted. You'll be in a much better position to nip those in the bud. You'll be able to do things like expedite your close. If you're not focused as an AP team on hammering away, trying to get all those invoices in as quickly as possible, right before the end of the month, you can really focus on closing AP, giving treasury time to close as well. And then you can start to think more strategically about your vendor payments. On the AP side, you're going to accelerate that processing time frame. You're going to move to more accurate and timely accruals, right? You'll have less to accrue because you'll be able to process that much faster. And really, you'll be able to take that step back and move from being reactive and transaction focused to being proactive and analytical. Do things like AP spend analysis. On the treasury side, if you're working closely together, if you've integrated your applications, you're going to get better recon between your AP, GL, and bank. You'll get a better cash position, of course, because you'll have much more accurate liability data. And you'll get a better model and forecast because you won't just have the current liabilities, you'll have due liabilities that are coming down the pipe. On the next slide, I think Nick's going to take it from here, where we talk about looking at the roles and responsibilities in a little more detail.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Appreciate it. And Luke, thank you for emceeing as well. And thank you all for your time joining us this afternoon. So let's get into the roles and responsibilities in the content here. Ultimately, this illustration does a really good job of showing the overlap as well as the unique attributes for both AP and Treasury, right? With AP, we're looking to get the bills paid, right? Capture that invoice data, get it formatted and into the ERP, right? It could be processing with GLs for approval. It could be PO invoicing, right? Matching those PO documents to the invoice itself, right? Ultimately getting approvals when necessary. And in the end, getting them into the ERP so they can get finalized and issue accurate payment, right? Now for the Treasury side, right, we're making sure we've got just enough cash on hand, right? The cash management piece of this is just understanding how much cash is currently on hand and does it need to be there, right? Understanding the necessity, right? Ultimately facilitating the movement of those assets falls on Treasury a lot of the times, right? And ultimately deciding whether to hold the cash, invest it, or otherwise, right, to make those decisions. Now, with the overlap, right, all of it's tied to the dollars, as we know, right? Whether you're issuing the payments, right, which is extremely vital on both sides of the fence, as Stephen really laid out well, right? Or tracking those processes to make sure that we're minimizing those fraud, right? Identifying the need to minimize those duplicate documents, to avoid those late payments, or even just the conversations about late payments, right? The duplicate documents, that's huge for both situations, right? Because, if we're paying, then there's work that has to be done to reverse the duplicate paying on those transactions, and usually on both sides of the fence. the key here is tracking that, right? And ultimately the goal is to keep the books clean, whether you're closing a month, a quarter, or a fiscal year, right? All the while making sure you're compliant and tracking the information along the way for the who that are involved, right? On the next slide, we'll get into a little bit about our recommendations. So what are our recommendations for those roles and responsibilities, and how do we establish them and maintain them, right? I think number one here can't be stressed enough. It's really defining ownership, right? Who is going to own these processes, right? The stakeholders in the systems, right? I always say the earlier in the process, the better, right? Even when it comes to hiring, right? As you see in the job description here, that hiring process, include those processes with that hiring process. Use it as a performance goal to incentivize the users, the employees to do their due diligence and make sure that these systems are working accurately and really achieving what they need them to. Now you're going to identify those by metrics to measure, right? You're going to know how well you're doing and hitting those performance goals when you've got good metrics in place to understand how it's going, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And then ultimately empowering the users, right? Give them the control to make the adjustments, to make sure that they can hit those performance goals, right? It all ties up from top to bottom. If the job description explicitly states what their role is, we give them goals to hit, metrics to understand the goals they're trying to hit, and ultimately giving them the power to adjust those processes to get that done. Now, Stephen did touch a little bit on shared access to applications, and I don't think this could ever be talked about enough, right? Making the information to those systems shared to both departments, right? As we know with any two departments, communication is crucial, right? Granting access to the Treasury systems to AP and the AP systems to Treasury just help that communication line stay clean. And then, again, when there's overlap, everybody's in the know. There's no surprises, right? And that really leads into the last piece here, and that's integrating data across apps, right? That's connecting all of those together, typically using an ERP in the middle, as you can see here, right? We've got the AP on the front end, we've got the ERP, recording the debits and credits, for the lack of better words, and the TMS on the back end, making sure that the cash on hand is in the right position and invested appropriately. All right, so I know we've got a couple of poll questions coming in here before we get into optimizing the application. So we'll pass it to Luke for just a couple questions, and then we'll jump into the content.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. An awesome job so far, everybody. Curious again, we saw so many manual processes. I think it was nearly everybody who mentioned that in the beginning. So curious, I'm gonna just tell you up front, we're gonna ask two back to back. So curious to hear from the audience if you're currently using anything for automation on the accounts payable perspective. So curious to get that feedback from you all. We'll leave this up for a little bit, and then again, awesome participation so far. And then we're gonna be curious on the Treasury side as well. Again, kind of what's the state of the state? Who's again invested in some of these pieces? Like we didn't see a lot of optimizing applications. We saw a lot of manual processes. So I'll leave this up for another 5 seconds or so. All right, we'll stop that. We'll share these results. So again, a decent mix. More than half of you, no automation right now on the AP side. A little over a third of you do, and then some that aren't sure. And then the last one we're going to button up with, and I'll move my slides. You're seeing it there. Same thing, curious on the Treasury side of things. Yeah, are you using, and again, Excel doesn't count. So are you using a Treasury management system at all right now? And that'll help us, again, tailor some of this content to what you all are working with day in and day out. Good responses, awesome participation. We'll leave that up for another few moments. All right, ending in 3, 2, 1. Share those results, and ironically, nearly identical. Again, we've got more than half without not using a TMS system. A little under a third in this case, using one, and then others that aren't sure. So very insightful for the team. And again, thank you all for the quick feedback and making this interactive today. So now we'll dive into optimizing. Back to you, Nick.
Thanks, Luke. And thank you all for your participation. So we talked a little bit about the who. Now let's talk about the how, right? We've got the roles and responsibilities clearly defined. Let's talk about how to make the best of it, right? So number one, let's leverage best-in-class solutions, right? The best advice I can give is don't cut corners, right? If you cut corners and just do what's easiest, you're just going to have problems boil up downstream. It's just going to make things worse later. Again, my recommendation would be to make sure that you are dotting I's, crossing T's right off the bat, right? Make sure that everything is you have everything that you need out of the solutions that you're purchasing and investing in long term, right? A lot of organizations have processes that work, right? I know Luke called out the spreadsheet comment there on the TMS platform, and yeah, for some organizations it works, right? And it solves the problem, but is just working good enough is always the question I like to ask, because there's ways to make things work and there's a way to make things work well and user friendly and in a way that's actually meaningful for somebody on the day to day. So make sure that you're keeping that into consideration as you're going through the day to day, that there are a lot of processes in AP and on the TMS side that work, but ultimately you want to extend your ERP to do what it does, right? The ERP is going to be great to record your debits and credits, and it does a phenomenal job of doing that because that's really its goal. But, the best way to do this is to let the other systems do what they specialize in, right? Most ERPs aren't going to specialize in AP invoice automation or TMS type transactions and systems. And so a big step here is doing your due diligence on what's out there and understand the big problems and the big headaches you need to solve, right? I think that's a huge piece of this. And again, the integration to those ERP systems and TMS to AP are going to just make those manual processes easier, because when you don't have to manually babysit the interaction of data, it's just going to take away those menial tasks and give you and your users an opportunity to focus on more transformative and value added tasks, we'll call them. Now with AP automation, right, a big piece of this is workflow and process automation, right? Making sure that you have an efficient approval process and a efficient workflow, right? So you can understand all possible paths a transaction can take. That's going to ensure you're compliant, right? For audit purposes and otherwise, it's going to minimize your fraud risk. It's also going to minimize those issues downstream, right? It's really going to help you button up and understand where the documents are in the process. And we'll talk about a little bit further on how we can track that. And a big piece of this is being holistic, right? A lot of features here that you're seeing, right, to consider, and really, major concepts around the optimization, but be holistic, right? Understand for your organization specifically what needs to get adjusted, right? We need to solve those most important processes and the ones that take up the most time. Automate when you can, right? And a few big factors, like I said, listed here as well. With really the goal overall is to future-proof your tech stack, right? Make sure you're not cutting those corners. When you do it right, so you've got long-term success and you feel comfortable about where you're at within the process. And ultimately make sure they're flexible. So when things do change, you can react and potentially be proactive when you know they're on the horizon. And ultimately the goal, adapt and solve those major pains. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what MHC can bring to the table here with accounts payable, right? So the first thing, and I can't talk enough about it, is the intelligent capture, right? Using up-to-date, industry-leading current technology, right? Optical character recognition is a big part of it, right? That's the reading of the data, but we take that a step further, right? We're going to use artificial intelligence and machine learning to augment that OCR to make the system get better as it works, right? What we say is we're going to automate 80% of your data entry out of the box. That's connecting, integrating to your ERP, and 80% of that data is automatically extracted out of the box and into the 90s as you use the software because of that machine learning concept. We've also got, ways to automate with the GL coding and touchless interactions with PO invoices, right? We call that touchless or straight through processing, not listed here, but we really should, understand that those processes allow documents to be finalized without human intervention, right? They can pass through the system with the extracted data and they're paid for through the ERP, right? Automated approvals, I touched on that just a few minutes ago. Making sure that you're optimizing the workflows so you can be efficient, you can be compliant, and you've got visibility along that whole chain, no matter where the documents are traveling, right? To ultimately ensure that those invoices are paid on time, you're maximizing those discounts, minimizing the potential for late payments or negative vendor interactions, right? Get those handled, get them done well. And then the payment optimization piece, right? In the end, we're going to pay the vendors in the best way possible, right? That's the goal. Not the only way to pay is not just a check, right? Is what I'm trying to say here. The idea is pay them in the best way. What payment modality makes the most sense, right? For the mom and pop shops, it's going to be hard to avoid a check in a lot of situations. So have the ability to produce those checks when they're necessary. But when you can, right, utilize the ACH to keep the cost down, right? It costs money to seal or stuff envelopes and mail, right? The ACH is just going to be much more cost effective. And in situations where your vendors can accept a virtual card, right? Utilize those rebates, utilize those options you have to maximize your opportunity when it comes to paying your vendors, right? The goal here, optimize AP, right? We're going to understand the outstanding liabilities at any given time, process them quickly and efficiently, right? And get the vendors paid in the best way possible. We're going to pass it back to Stephen to talk a little bit about the TMS side of the fence.
Thank you, Nick. So from a Treasury perspective, there are quite a few different optimization opportunities, things you can do if you have a TMS platform, or even just kind of a roadmap for the first things to do when you invest in one. So I did divide it up into kind of level 1, level 2 being the first couple of projects and kind of the later, more complex optimization opportunities that are still out there and should still be considered. So number 1, and we've been harping on this, but we're harping on it for a reason, is building that integration. So making sure that from the Treasury side, you have your bank files, all of your banks integrated. So you can import those bank statements, get real-time cash data, and then start to build the forecast. And again, you enhance that forecast by bringing in AP data, you enhance the forecast by bringing in investment and debt and AR data too. But at the very least, building that integration is the foundation. Once those bank statements are in there, setting up your automated statement reconciliation rules is really going to be, it's going to feed that process automation narrative that we were just talking about. If you can set up enough automatic reconciliation rules, it really elevates your team from transaction-based, just trying to reconcile those transactions, to exception-based or analytical-based. It gives you that space to step back, look at your exceptions more holistically, and say, okay, well, what are causing these exceptions? Why aren't these things reconciling? Can we go upstream and clean up data? Can we go downstream or to the bank and see if there's something on their end? But it really does let you start to act strategically if you're not swamped with transaction processing. Automating payment dispatch. So I know it was on the slide earlier, but payment dispatch and payment approval and things like that, that's one of those shared overlapping spaces for AP and Treasury. But being able to send approved payments out the door automatically without generating payment files or needing to take manual steps, that's definitely a huge opportunity for process automation. And then finally, from the analytics perspective, building multiple forecasting models. So a 30-day model is great, but expanding that to 60, 90, quarterly, even greater than 90 days, if you know that you have, say, regular liabilities, regular supplier payments that happen quarterly or annually, build that into your model. If you know that you have receivables coming due or debt coming due, build it all into your model. And those are kind of the key opportunities when you're starting out. If you really want to go beyond that and start to think about enhanced treasury management, you can start to expand beyond a single bank statement integration per day to intraday activity, pulling in multiple bank statements per day and getting down to kind of that hour by hour granularity of cash in, cash out. Similarly, or in parallel with that, you would want to put a ZBA structure in place. So getting your sweeps in place, getting the zero balance accounting, getting all of that accounting integrated back to your ERP. Doing all of this will really let you elevate to that next level. You can also, similarly to the AP side, where you want to do payment type analysis, you want to do your bank fee analysis. Get some of this automation in place. Take that step back, do some of the real analytical work to understand what your fee structure looks like. And if there are ways to consolidate accounts to minimize your bank fees. If you have the size and complexity that might warrant it, doing something like in-house banking, where your business units are lending each other money and it's all managed internally to yourself. That's a really excellent way to minimize your bank fees if you have the assets to back it up. But again, that's, it's not the first thing you're going to do, but it is something to keep in mind for that long-term roadmap. Because at the end of the day, you want to minimize your costs, you want to integrate the applications, and you want to maximize what you can report, right? You want those forecasts, you want that data all in one place. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about process automation. And again, as it should be very clear, our perspective is automation. The goal should always be to maximize the effectiveness and efficiency of your staffed resources. I talked about it a little earlier, so I don't need to hammer on it too much. But if you think about treasury teams, oftentimes they're very small. They're working with limited resources. Using tools, building automation helps really maximize the value of a small team. Conversely, on the AP side, oftentimes the teams are much larger, but it's usually a little bit of a lower value add work. If you don't have things like intelligent capture or OCR in place, if you don't have automated workflow, the team is spending most of their time doing data entry or following up for business approvals, when building those automations is going to save time and really help support those bigger teams to do more value add activities. You're all familiar with these obstacles, right? If you're doing this manually, you're going to end up with long invoice processing time. If you don't have business rules or hierarchy or workflow, you're going to have a long time to approve running invoices around the office. From the treasury side, if you don't have that visibility into your liability data, you're going to keep too much cash on hand and you're going to be subject to that inflation pressure and missing out on your short-term investment opportunities. And then in general, resourcing, if you have too few treasury staff, you're going to spend your time dispatching payments instead of analyzing or forecasting. So for us, automation is really the key to this whole thing, the key to bringing it all together. You eliminate manual tasks, you use pre-built rules, and really you bring all of that data together so that your people can do value add analytical work and really maximize what you're doing with your spend. On the next slide, I think Nick's going to bring it home with our focus on data.
Thanks, Stephen. So lastly, let's focus on the data, right? So, we've defined the who, right? The roles and responsibilities, some recommendations on how to become more automated and efficient, right, with your processes. But as we all know, the data drives it all, right? And you'll see there's three key facets here, right? Availability, timeliness, and accuracy. And the way to really achieve those, starts with analytics, right? End-to-end visibility. Understanding the flow of cash from end to end, from input to payment to, again, bank accounts in the back end, right? providing role specific dashboards. And we touched on this just a little bit, right? Sharing those across departments, making sure the Treasury can see the AP dashboards and information, and AP can see the Treasury information, right? So they are in sync and they understand the position that the organization's in at a given time. And then from there, right, forecasting and analysis becomes much more digestible, right? You have that information with those dashboards and the visibility to everything going on. It gives you, the ability to look into the future, right? To analyze those results and ultimately make decisions. Again, best case, we've got the people in place. Those roles and responsibilities have been well established, and they're there just making decisions to make sure that the future success is in line and have the information to make those decisions. So on the left side here, you'll see AP, right? AP is ultimately, right, what are the transactions doing in the process? Where are they, right? With that workflow hierarchy, are they sitting with AP? Are they out in the field? Are they in an exception process, right? How much are they for, right? What are the dollar figures there? And ultimately, how can we maximize our payment opportunities regardless of the modality, right? Called out a few of them earlier. From the Treasury side, right? Not to sound like a broken record, but understanding our cash position, the balances, how are we invested? We don't want money sitting around for the various reasons that Stephen called out early on. Where's the money gone historically, right? What is changing? What are we needing to adjust based on the history we have with that flow of cash? And then what's outstanding, right? What is out there? What do we still need to pay? What checks do we still need to write? What ACHs do we need to send? And all the while, right, understanding the aging, the accrual reporting, right? Making sure that that's buttoned up and the departments, all departments involved, understand the outstanding dollars and ultimately what's coming.
Right. Awesome information, Nick, Stephen. And again, I think I mentioned at the beginning, but please, team, everyone attending today, feel free to chime in with any Q&A via the webinar content there. Please send those in. There have been a couple that have come through already. So I'm going to read one of those off, but if there's something that's been pressing or top of mind for any of you that you want to run by the team today, please don't hesitate to do so. One of the first questions that came up was, what would you two recommend as the first steps? What are the first 2-3 things to do? Let's say you've got a lot of manual processes. You maybe don't have applications in place like we saw from a lot of the respondents. How do you start? What are the couple actions to take, right off the bat?
Yeah, I can take that one first, Luke. I think I called it out. I think in the first section I jumped into, I think doing your due diligence, right? Understanding those major pains, I would say is number one. Where do you need to improve the most? What user experiences, maybe could use an upgrade? I think that would be number one. And number two is do your due diligence, right? Understand what's out there, understand how the products you're evaluating are going to solve your problems, and feel really good about that from the AP standpoint.
Yeah, Nick, I completely agree. I know you called it out with process and workflow mapping as kind of a prerequisite. For most of my projects, that is the prerequisite. Let's understand where the causes of pain are current state, and then that's going to really drive whether like an AP investment or a Treasury investment or both is the right approach to get started. And as we saw in some of those poll results, it's kind of 50-50 across the group here as to who even has some of these platforms in place. So it's really going to depend on the organization, in my opinion, which is why starting with a strategic assessment is key.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, maybe building off of that, another question that we had was, and again, kind of thinking about the audience, fellas, I think we could maybe take it, pre-state and post-state, but what metrics, what data, what KPIs, if you want to use that term, should, AP or Treasury teams be looking at to determine, kind of where they stand on that spectrum of success?
Yeah, definitely from the AP side, turnaround times I think are big, right? I called that out a few times. It's minimizing the interactions with the vendors, right? If you can run well without really interacting aside from that transaction back and forth, it's going to be the best case, right? Because it takes time to have those conversations. It takes time to, to evaluate the best way to handle it, right? So I would definitely say, turnaround times and then head count, right? How many people do you have, handling these transactions? Understanding that the more people you have, the more complex the processes are. So I think those are just the two main ones that come to mind for me off the bat.
Yeah, I always like to think about the analytical side of things. So from the AP perspective, doing that spend analysis and your vendor analysis, that's kind of the big one from first steps analytically. What do we change? Starting to take a look at your vendor master, look at your terms, look at who you're spending money with and how much and what method it's going out the door. And then similarly on the treasury side, and doing some of that investment analysis, as well as from a transactional side, how well are we actually hitting? Are we paying on time? Are payments going out the door? What's our wire payment ratio? You talk a little bit about checks being expensive. Same thing with wires, right? And a lot of times those non-routine payments from a treasury side, they get expensive in their own right. So I would start with some of that background, if you will, about what's our current landscape. Who are we paying, how much, how, to really lay that out so that we can start to say, well, these are some of the things that need to get tweaked in addition to the actual transactional stuff that we talked about quite a bit on this call.
Excellent. Awesome pieces. Trying to see if we've got any more questions. Not seeing any at the moment, so we might wrap a little early today. Obviously, awesome information from both of you. Again, the audience might be camped, but I'll certainly give these two a round of applause. Attendees, thank you all for joining us today. If you got questions, feel free to contact us. Obviously these are things we're passionate about. We get excited about. How do we help organizations really be successful on, whatever side of the fence you're at, and wherever stage you are in your journey to get better. So I'll maybe give one last thank you to Nick and Steven for their time today, and a big thank you to everyone for hopping on. We certainly appreciate it. Have an awesome rest of your Tuesday, everyone.
Thank you
Thanks
all
for your time.